Hey, LA Progressive friends and family. This is Dick Price and Sharon Kyle coming to you from the LA Progressive. This is our office. And we kind of run on a real short budget, so a small budget. So we're asking you to, if you can't contribute, to at least share, to join, to subscribe, and to give us a thumbs up. Thanks so much. Nothing.
Hey, LA Progressive readers. We're back again, this time with Aaron Leonard, who we've published a couple times and just published a really fascinating article. Aaron is the author of Heavy Radicals, the FBI's Secret War on American Maoists, and A Threat of the First Magnitude, FBI Counterintelligence and Infiltration. So before we turned on the Zoom, you were telling us how you got into this kind of thought process. Could you recite some of that?
Yeah, well, I came of age in the early 70s, so I missed the pinnacle years of 1968, 1969, but there was enough radicalism free floating through the ether that I was able to grab onto it. I actually started a little proto-radical group in my hometown in central New York we had a great name, the Stoned Rabbits People's Party, kind of modeled, off of uh, John Sinclair's thing in Detroit and the Black Panthers. And, we were all over the place, but it was a thing to do. But as I came of age and left home, I actually connected with the Revolutionary Communist Party, which was the largest Maoist group to emerge from the late 60s, early 70s. I mean, they're still around today as a cult around Baba Vakian. It's kind of a whole story. But I stayed with them a long time. It was kind of the church I joined. But then I kind of had a moment where it was like, oh, I suddenly I don't think I believe this anymore. I left. But when I left, I set out to write a book to try to make sense of it, a political history. And I started discovering all these FBI documents, this with my collaborator, Connor Gallagher. It turns out it was one of the biggest FBI investigations of that period. I mean, the Weathermen get all the press because they broke laws. They allowed the FBI to kind of go full force. They embarrassed the government, etc. They were actually a smaller entity to emerge from that time. The FBI was much more concerned, or I shouldn't say much more concerned, they were quite concerned with organized forces. So that kind of led me to, first I did this book on the RCP, but then I did a book on informants. The last two books then I did two books on music, one on folk singers in the Bureau, people like Woody and Pete Seeger. And then I translated that into another book on the 70s. I'm making up for lost time.
Yeah,
Actually, a little plug here, right? My latest book is, I talk about the period 1978, 1979, which kind of leads into what we're talking about here. Because in talking about 1979, you confront the United States at the peak of its manufacturing employment. It's tethered right at the point of what's come to be called neoliberalism, Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher, and deindustrialization, and a kind of a ravaging of the United States landscape. So that's kind of what put my head toward looking at economics, which is, not an easy subject. I'm not an economist. At the same time, there seems to be a lot of economists who really don't know what they're talking about, do they, right?
So Aaron, so before you go much further, you said a couple of things that triggered questions in my mind. So you talked about how your interests in this area started sort of after, so you're not really a 60s kid. It sounds like you're of my generation. So Dick was in college in the 60s and I was in elementary school. So, but when the 70s rolled around, I was still a kid. I wasn't even a teenager yet, but by the mid 70s, late 70s, and you started to talk a little bit about like the Powell Memo of 1971, 1971, the disclosure of COINTELPRO. And I'm really interested in what you're describing sounds like COINTELPRO kind of activities with the FBI, but later than 1971. Is that right?
Well, it's really interesting because I think the work I've done with, my friend Connor Gallagher, who's a younger guy who was with the same group I was, and we both left at the same time, so we commiserated and then kind of entered on this project is what we've discovered is COINTELPRO is probably this much of the story. The FBI had developed a whole doctrine, mainly by targeting the Communist Party USA. And the Communist Party USA is, for lack of a better word, they're not very sexy. I mean, they're in the 60s, they were, kind of marginal. They seemed conservative. They were doing hard work. They had an organizational structure, but they weren't really, garnering the appeal of Stokely Carmichael, the Black Panthers, SDS, things like that. But the FBI had established a doctrine of, suppression, a kind of a low-grade counterinsurgency against domestic radicalism that went further than COINTELPRO. COINTELPRO itself stands for Counterintelligence Program. It was initiated in 1956. Speaking of religion, Nikita Khrushchev stood up and denounced Stalin, which was akin to the Pope saying, not so sure about this Jesus stuff. It created a crisis in the international communist movement. The FBI was watching this and they wrote a memo and said, this is a real problem for the Communist Party. Kick them while they're down. Let's start a whole program to try to destroy them internally. They had infiltrated the group pretty intensively. So I'm actually coming out with I just sent a book into Rutgers University Press, which hopefully will come out late spring, summer next year, about the history of the repression against the Communist Party, because it is the biggest project the FBI undertook, and it's how they learned to do things. They had established this index. Initially, FDR and Hoover had basically set on this idea of a custodial detention index, which said, we need to look at domestic communists and to a degree Nazis, that if there's a crisis, we need to put them in camps, essentially concentration camps. That model went forward right up until 1971 under different names and not always sanctioned, but that was a big project of the FBI. Phone taps were a big project beyond COINTELPRO, gathering the intelligence. So, I mean, in a long kind of answer that I'm giving is, I kind of feel like maybe 20 years ago, I felt like I knew everything there was to be known about the FBI. And today I feel like, well, there's an awful lot we don't know. And it's actually, I think it's helpful that people do know it. I mean, I don't think the FBI is playing the same role they played. I think some of this has been privatized and there's local police agencies that do this stuff. I mean, the FBI is under a degree of scrutiny that, well, they've also abandoned a lot of their domestic intelligence to be replaced by terrorism and criminal investigations. But
whether Aaron, can we turn to this article that we just published? The title of the article is "Listening to the Clash After the Election." The Clash in the title is the famous punk rock band who and you cite a famous song they wrote, Combat Rock, and then can you trace your trail from that observation to your discussion of this recently completed election and its absolute missing the boat on economic inequality issues?
Yeah, it's interesting because I was actually even thinking about the term economic inequality, which strikes me more as a kind of a description than a definition. I mean, people in the United States don't like to talk about class, or it's been flattened out as, well, we got race, gender, class. It's just one of these things. But in looking at the election, well, the exit polls showed that for a lot of people, the issue was democracy, and for a lot of people, it was the economy. Um, and it seems like the economy is kind of discussed pretty superficially in terms of the price of eggs and the price of gasoline.
Right.
I mean, I was talking with my wife and I was like, if you had wanted to win that election, all you would have had to do, and maybe not, is get up and say, I'm going to institute a 20% reduction against mortgage and rent across the board. And I think you would just have a groundswell of support, because this is what people are actually, it's what's the biggest expense people have is where they live. And it's more and more becoming elusive. But beyond that, beyond the price of eggs, is a fundamental transformation of the economy. I talk in the article about, so Donald Trump goes to Detroit, and Donald Trump he's not a smart man, but he's a talented demagogue, I guess. But he's in Detroit. Somehow in his mind, he knows Detroit is having a hard time. And he's like, we don't want the rest of the country to be like Detroit. And the Democrats come back and say, well, Detroit is actually doing pretty darn good. And I looked at that, and Detroit used to be the fourth largest city in the country. It was a behemoth. It was the envy of the world. It made the tanks and jeeps that won World War II, or played such a significant role. People could get a job in an auto plant, black and white people, and they would be in the middle class. People would have, where I come from in central New York, a good factory job meant you could buy a cabin in the Adirondacks as a worker with a high school education.
Yeah, that's a second home, as a vacation home.
Exactly. Detroit today, I think it's like the 24th largest city in the country. It's just a shadow of what it once was. And there's Detroit, and there's Cleveland, and there's Buffalo, and there's Rochester. In Baltimore, people know about Baltimore today mainly because of the wire.
Right.
They used to make ships in Baltimore, and they employed 33,000 people in very good paying jobs. I mean, I'm not trying to romanticize this. Factory jobs were, grueling labor, it was unhealthy, people got hurt, etc. I mean, they had their own set of problematics. But what's happening now is problematics of a different order, where people are essentially not needed. Huge swaths of people in this country are not needed. And that's pretty intense. And I think it goes beyond the kind of conversation that occurred, through the course of the election, which I think the elections want to try to keep the conversation with, let's not get carried away about the whole social order on who owns things and how things are made. But I think that's part of what got revealed is there's a great deal of discontentment, and there seems to be millions of people who are ready to vote for, any knucklehead who makes, empty promises. I mean, it's like I don't excuse people for voting for Trump, but at the same time, I'm trying to understand why uninformed people might do it. Is he's making these promises that appear to resonate, even though, he had 4 years where he pretty much didn't realize any of that stuff. So
Yeah, I note in the most recent election, in the most recent campaigns, the fact that, there used to be a war on poverty and the poor are never mentioned. The blue collar people are not mentioned. It's all about middle class people and raising themselves up. And yet, as you point out in the article, I mean, things are very much different. I mean, there are many of the towns that you mentioned. Those are the big cities that are part of the Rust Belt. But I'm from Minnesota, and I know the small towns there are similarly disemboweled with whatever local industry they had has been mostly shipped south of the border or across the Pacific, leaving people working two shifts at the local In-N-Out burger and barely scraping by. And I think what we see is people are pretty desperate, and they don't just accept a campaign of joy. They just soon tear down the walls. And I see that's a lot of what happens with Trump's support. And he knows how to tap into it. He doesn't know how to do anything about it, but he knows how to tap into it.
Yeah, it's pretty intense. I mean, just kind of on a personal note as well. Like I grew up in central New York in the Mohawk Valley. And, when I was growing up, there was two or three shoe factories. There was a factory that made nutcrackers, probably the only place in the country. They made bicycles. Remington Arms was the big anchor. They made, rifles that helped win the Civil War and were instrumental in arms during World War II. And then they carried on making, much more dubious weapons before they finally went bankrupt. But there was a whole life there. I go there now. I'm driving around with my brother, and my brother's telling me, oh, yeah, this morning I saw a guy relieving himself in the middle of downtown, because he lives in a house where everybody's addicted to fentanyl.
Right.
It's like, it's shocking. It's actually distressing. I mean, I never glorified my hometown, but it's like this place you were from used to be someplace, or it felt like it was someplace, and now it's ravaged. And you can see where there would be a simmering anger and a rage at things, and it's not getting addressed because I think globally everything's changing. I mean, the economy, my understanding is China now is considered the workbench of the world. Well, some of these people are saying, well, if we slap on tariffs or we do this and that, it's going to come back. I was actually reading some articles from Philadelphia from the 80s. And I think it was a certain textile mill was talking about, yeah, we made these particular kind of garments here, but it's slowly been shipped overseas. But there was a whole network we had in place here to do this. And when you rip up that network, you don't recreate it. It took decades to do that. So, the industries that have gone overseas, I mean, are they really going to come back? I mean, even if people here were willing to work for the lower wages that people work in China, in a country where they're demagogically trying to organize people against immigrants who are willing to work at very low wages. Do you think, U.S. citizens are really going to be willing to step into jobs at, sub minimum wage and such, even if they did come back? But the bigger problem is, I reference Frederick Jameson, the late cultural critic, in the article. I had the pleasure of being able to interview him some years back. And the first thing he said to me, he says, oh, yeah, I was listening to the radio this morning, and some broker gets on the radio and he says, I don't wake up in the mornings thinking, how can I create jobs? Because, the Republicans in particular say, well, we're the job creators. I wake up in the morning thinking, how am I going to make money? I mean, this is what they live and breathe. I mean, Marx famously called capitalists the personification of capital. So,
Yeah.
you think these people are going to help you? I don't think so.
Of course not. So people that are informed, that kind of stay on top of all of this information, people that that have an education, is particularly an education that centers economics. They understand that what we're seeing here is end stages of capitalism. And where we are right now with the gutting out of the manufacturing sector of the United States was very predictable, beginning with the decisions that were made with our trade policies back during the Clinton administration. You could see how this would turn out. It's not going to turn out very well for the people, vast majority of people in the United States who were in the middle class, that were supported by not just the manufacturing sector, but what you also said, Aaron, all of the ancillary industries that are connected to that. I mean, I'm just thinking of my own personal experience. So I worked for NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory for 23 years, and it's still there in Pasadena. They just had a bunch of layoffs, but every time they have layoffs, that affects all of the surrounding industries, the ma and pa dry cleaning services, the schools and the students that have to move away, so the schools get less funding and so on. So I've been thinking about solutions, because what we're talking about is we're describing the dire situation that we're in right now, but there've got to be some solutions. And I was recently reading a book written by Margaret Kelly, who talks about the extractive economy that the United States has relied on, pretty much just taking and not really building and investing in the people. And I'm wondering, do you have some solutions? Yeah, we can talk about how awful things are, but what kind of solutions can you envision?
Well, I would like to say I have an answer for that. I don't. So straight off, what I will say is, kind of having gone through the church of radicalism or being a communist or whatever, I've become, the further away I get from it, the more respectful I am of how conditional things are and how global answers or stage managing a global solution is far more difficult and fraught than I ever imagined. That said, I refuse to become cynical. I think humanity has, we've got this gift. We're alive. We can think. We can be with each other, and we need to appreciate that, and we need to strive to take it forward. So I haven't given up trying. I would say, though, I feel like actually getting at where things are actually at in a real sense can only be helpful, even though it might be a little bit distressing. Because I think actually what we're seeing happening in the United States is, I talk in the article about unemployment, or this whole, the most vital industries in this country seem to be industries that are putting people out of work. I mean, think of an invention like the iPhone and how many people were made, as they say in England, redundant by
Right.
that invention. I mean, I think history develops through, progress and calamity. I can't see around corners to know where things are. I know there's a lot of people who really care greatly about the state of things and are really committed to trying to make things better. I guess I see my role is, to the degree I have a voice, is to try to get, under the hood of where things are actually at. I mean, so saying that, what do I think? Well, I think you addressed, the elephant in the room is capitalism. I mean, this whole notion that we should produce things for profit and that's the best way to run society. Well, no, it isn't. Now, there's been these experiments with these socialist society, which I don't, they've not really been very successful. Some of those, had I lived there, I think I would have been probably would have been executed as an enemy of the state, or, just somebody who kind of went along. So there's that whole legacy. But I don't think that denies the fact that at its core, if you want to run society to make a lot of money, people are going to get hurt. Where things are all headed, I think we're in for some tumult, some upheaval and stuff. There's a lot more people are finding themselves at the margins and outside of society. Who's going to speak for them? I think some people are trying to, but I kind of feel like more is needed. So long-winded answer, not exactly answering your question, but that's what I can say.
Well, you ended your piece, the last paragraph, you say the outcome of the 2024 election is a bitter pill, worsened by what it reveals about the state of things. The fact is that for a large mass of people in this country, including those embracing politics contrary to their own interests, as the Clash song says, there ain't no need for you. For those concerned with the larger project of humanity, that is both an insult and a challenge. And I like that you end with a challenge, because I believe that as dreary as things are, we have the capacity to change things. And I think we actually even have the tools. And one of those tools is communication and educating. And so,
Yeah, so I would add to that. I think this current tumult, I think indeed we're in the midst of it and it's going to get worse. But that may push people into substantive actions. I mean, there are solutions on the books that nobody bothers to consider because nobody wants to work at it hard enough. And maybe that'll change if enough people are in enough pain. Or maybe we'll just dissolve into some kind of anarchy.
Yeah, and we don't need to worry about that. We need to worry about that not happening. But one of the things I did some years ago is I got my college degree late, and the first course I took was critical thinking, and the professor recommended this book, Asking the Right Questions. And I think we do need to ask the right questions and constantly push the edges of the question, not this small problem immediately in front of us, but why are things this way? And maybe therein lay the answer. But yeah, it is a challenge for sure. But we can, my wife has this, she's always like, we continue. So we do.
well, Aaron Leonard, it's been a pleasure having a conversation with you this afternoon. And we look forward to more of your writings and perhaps another interview in the very near future.
Okay, well, thanks. It was really great talking and finally getting to meet you both.
Thank you for sticking around. If you like the LA Progressive content and the discussions we have here, please consider clicking the subscribe button below and also give us a thumbs up. That helps to grow our audience by feeding the algorithm, which helps to get this content in front of more eyes. Thanks for stopping by. We really appreciate your support.